Hello, my name is Adam Bean and welcome to the 59th edition of AirHacks TV. And was short month, so let's start with the topics. First, nothing new here, but what this is, they are the next airhacks.com workshops at Munich Airport. The only thing which I will do is I will extend the effective Java EE workshop with JMS. So I ignore JMS for actually no reason. I do a lot JMS, and JMS is actually great for microservice to microservice communication. Of course, if you have set up, your own JMS server in cluster, this is another story. But if you have something like a central MQ series or a central, Sonic MQ or Artemis or whatever, then it is a really interesting way to communicate between from microservice to microservice. And what I will always do in the effective web, I will provide an example, working example for push notifications, and BCE, boundary control entity, is actually one of the questions of this AirHacks TV. Okay, so now let's start with the topics. First, the Docklands got a new image, and the image is glassfish. So you see, it's a fresh 2 days old, and this is the Jakarta EE glassfish. I tested that very briefly. It's fast, works nice, and I already pushed the image to Maven Central. The great story is if you will start with Java EE8 archetype, my old archetype, it will automatically generate the Docker file for this glassfish, because it uses airhacks/glassfish, and it will point to the latest image of glassfish. And now the latest image of glassfish is glassfish 5.1, and this glassfish 5.1 is the eclipsed glassfish, or Jakarta EE glassfish. Okay, now watch and deploy. What.sh got a new homepage, a standalone homepage or website, and what Watch and Deploy is a jar, 430 kilobyte self-contained jar, which watches changes in your ThinWar project and deploys or runs Maven after every change, and copies the ThinWar to auto-deploy folders of application servers of your choice, which causes deployment. So I even use Watt to prepare the samples for the AirHacks TV. Okay, the next one. We have a new episode, and I think actually 2 new episodes. So first was with Aryan Times, and Aryan Times is spec lead from Java 8 authentication and authorization. So we had a chat about, Aryan Times road to Java EE expert, and then we talked, what Java EE authentication and authorization is. So you could even answer some questions from this AirHacks TV just by listening to this. And Maven commitment is an episode with Robert Scholte, and Robert is a Maven committer. So we had I hope, an interesting discussion about Maven plugins, Maven extensions, future of Maven, Maven 4 and 5, and what will happen, and so forth, and even polyglot Maven, so replacing POM XML with POM JSON. And the interesting part is, so I actually mentioned this in the podcast episode. So I delivered a workshop, microservice cloud native microservice workshop for a company called CGI in the Netherlands. And what I did, I usually do, Maven clean install, which is clean is optional, and install is actually wrong for wars because package is sufficient. But I do it for a long time, so I just do Maven install, Maven clean install. And Robert attended the workshop and said, "Okay, you don't have to use clean." Every time I did it, he just say, "Okay, don't do clean; it's superfluous." And what happened then? Robert walked away. And I asked someone, "Hey, who is it?" It's like, "Hey, this is a Maven committer." So, oh, nice. And the next time at the CGI, I was invited again. And then I asked the audience, "Is Robert Scholte here?" And they told me no. So, okay, then I started again with Maven package install then. So if you like, listen to the episode. Okay, now The next thing is there are Jakarta blocks, block aggregator, which I really like. So I was a little bit hyperactive. So the last four episodes are, or 4 posts are from me, but they are really interesting posts about Jakarta EE, Eclipse, Glassfish 5.1, and so forth. And this really reminds me about of Java blocks. You know, it's how the blogging in Java space started. So we have a really nice block aggregator. So if you like, or if you have a blog which, you know, blogs about Java EE, MicroProfile, just add your blog here, and I think they will review your blog whether it is really about Java EE, but then you get included here, which is, I hope it's going to be a great resource about Java EE. Now, I wrote prediction for 2019, and I would like just to go through, because I would like to explain you how it happened, so how I gathered the points here. So first, I was actually surprised how Java actually is. So I use Java all the time. So for me, it's like, you know, old school JDK. So I thought, you know, the popularity declines because, you know, if something is major, it usually is no more that exciting. And the opposite happened. So all the indices make it seems like Java becomes more and more popular. And I think one of the reasons is GraalVM, which makes Java, you know, innovation in Java exciting again. And as well as now we get support from Amazon Corretto, driven by James Gosling, Red Hat, and Azul System. You can buy from these companies support for Java. And Oracle open source, Java mission controls, all the tooling is open source. I think this make Java even more popular as it was before. And I already wrote about the open source index and TOB index, and both looked already good, but I think next year could even look even better. The serverless and function as a service stuff, it happened to me several times where startups wanted to start with function as a service. In one particular case, there were lots of transactions involved. I just asked the question, have you did the math, you know, are functions really cheaper than, you know, some images running all the time? And in this particular case, application server was less expensive than function as a service. And the other case, it happened that if you would start with fine-grained function as a service, and a function is nothing else than, you know, like command pattern. This is what I see. So, you know, input in, input out, and this basically is. But I don't know whether you remember, but 10, 15 years ago, there was a huge drive towards command pattern. And the commands were not even distributed, they were local, and this already killed several projects, because if everything is command and everything, object in and object out, because it has to be generic, it was really hard to debug and to understand what the system is actually doing. So I think serverless and function as a service are really great as listeners to, for instance, persistent queues or SQS from Amazon or Kafka streams or whatever, but it's not a great or not an easy or productive programming model to build, you know, whole applications around functions, because it's also hard to build, you know, the whole application just with command pattern. Okay, Kotlin. I got also questions about Kotlin, about my statement about Kotlin. And Kotlin is nice, but Kotlin became very popular. I think one of the drivers was Android development and support for Android tooling. But what happened or what can happen is there's a Fuchsia operating system in Flutter. And I think Google is not that interested, you know, keeping JVM on Android because of the lawsuit. And I think if they push Fuchsia, or however it is pronounced, and Flutter, I think they could even push Dart a little bit more. And the question is, will Kotlin popularity grow in case Google moves away from Kotlin? This would be an interesting exercise. So this was just that. But I think Kotlin could still grow because now it's very fashionable and also nice language. And I think what should happen is that the popularity of thin wars should grow larger. And what I mean by thin wars is, what it means to me is that you clearly separate the infrastructure for your business logic. So you put just the business logic in your war, so it is small, and everything resides on the server. And there are several reasons. Philip Reeks, he attended the AirHacks at Munich Airport, and he even told me that the nice thing with ThinWars is they had to do some security scanning, and there was nothing to scan because the war is empty, so there were no issues at all, and the application server image was already scanned by the central department, so the application was secure by default, and in all projects, there was actually no backdraft or no negative experience with ThinWars, and so I think it could even grow even more. We had already some chats behind the scenes, but what I don't get is why ThinWars is not like complement of function as a service, because for me ThinWars is like serverless, because I just focus on business logic. I don't care about servers at all, and I push the ThinWars to the cloud. It would be great operating model or programming model for the clouds, if you think about this. And what the cloud providers could do, they could just provide you, a proprietary producers which will inject, Google specific or Amazon specific services. From my perspective, it's a way better programming model than the singletons or whatever they provide you. Okay, so Jakarta EE, I think they will gain momentum. So now they have a great marketing stunts like this Jakarta Blocks EE. Nice name, nice design, logo is great. I get questions all the time, so the visibility is good. So I think something could happen in 2019. And MicroProfile should also gain attention, because as I told you several times, I completely ignored MicroProfile because my impression was it was designed, or the whole story about MicroProfile is to run on custom runtimes, not on servers, because you cannot use the name application server is outdated, so they talked about runtimes. And the funny story was most of the lightweight runtimes were not that lighter or smaller than full-blown application servers. But now remember the metrics I provide you, the MicroProfile and Java EE metrics. But now the MicroProfile is supported by all major application servers, and this is actually great, because now we have both, Java 8 like the major or boring, operating system for components, and MicroProfile is like very pragmatic cloud native stuff. And what I suspected to happen earlier, but it happened now in 2018, end of 2018. All major Google providers, all major cloud providers can ship now hardware to your data center with private clouds. So I think this is the beginning of gaining more private cloud, I would say, popularity, because if you think about this, hardware is cheap, everything is cheap except power. And the only problem is managing and provisioning. But if this works great, you could run, the whole Amazon cloud in your data center. Now, Microsoft, Google, Mozilla, Samsung, and others, they committed at the MDN, Mozilla Developer Network, something like the JCP. And what I also observe, at least I got lots of requests from clients and contracts, and I could work full-time in the area, is by deleting frameworks and going into web standards. And I think this year more people will recognize that you can build nice applications very productively with no external dependencies front end, just with web components, service workers, grid layout, flex layout, fetch API, WebSockets, and so forth. And so I expect more projects to do this, and it already started. I think it was Devox. So after the Devox, attendees came to me, and they already knew that I'm using the web standard approach, and we just they just say, okay, how we do this and this, and we are just we just talked about the details, but they also didn't use the frameworks anymore. So. And Java becomes, they have trend releases, and what happens with trend releases, we get more releases per year, so we get also more press releases per year and more features per year, which could lead that Java becomes more and more popular and the other JVM languages like Scala and Clojure less popular. A big deal, actually. So you asked me several times about Hystrix. So now there is no more Hystrix. It's end of life by Netflix. And Netflix said, okay, you can use Resilience4j. So just migrate the Hystrix code to Resilience4j. Many or some Java EE projects, they use Hystrix without any reasons. So I was in projects where they use strange command pattern structures and empty fallbacks just to have Hystrix. And I'm really curious what they will do right now, because they will have to move away or migrate their code to something. And I think the only reasonable thing right now is the MicroProfile, because it is supported by several vendors. And even if one vendor goes out of business, the other will support that. So, and I think with Hystrix, the enterprises start to think, what happens if other frameworks go out of business or stop being developed. And I think this can give more push towards ThinWars. Okay, Microsoft's discontinued Edge, which means Chromium. This is the Chrome browser, and there were just Chromium and Firefox basically, which is not that great for the browser ecosystem, but it is really good for enterprise projects, because we actually don't need NPM anymore. We can just go in production without any transpilation. And as I told you several times already last year, larger German companies, you can just use Chrome or Firefox as a default browser, so you are no more forced to use Internet Explorer or Edge. And what really surprised me, how popular OpenShift actually is. And by the way, just forgot to mention that. Go to my blog. There is a series, I think 40 to 50 episodes about cloud native Java EE with OpenShift. It's completely free screencast I recorded this summer. And now it was published by Red Hat. So if you like, watch that. And I think OpenShift can become even more popular. I use OpenShift a lot with Payara, Whitefly, and OpenLiberty. And it is a really great platform, a nice command line interface, and they have also a web app, and a nice wrapper around Kubernetes. So now, what happened, I was invited to companies, several conferences, internal keynotes and so forth. And every company had OpenShift. So I was really surprised how popular OpenShift actually is. Okay. Done. Now start with the real topics. Now, Java authentication, additional user information, retrieval. So now this is the question from Nick Ho or Nico. He loves the show. Thank you. I'm really appreciated, because for me, sometimes I listen to myself because I have to edit the show as well, and I say, this is really terrible, complete chaos, But if you like it, I'm glad. So now, how do you actually retrieve logged in user extra information like full name, email, phone number in a typical Java application? I think the specs are dry on this aspect, and I really like to avoid extra libraries. You see, ThinWars. So we have the first push towards ThinWars. Now I thought, okay, I can just tell you it is easy, but you won't believe me. So I implemented the full example so I can show you live. I think we should also code a little bit more on the show. So what I implemented, we have an AirHacks principle, which is the caller principle, and you can provide in the principle address numbers, telephone numbers, or whatever. They won't come from thin air. You will have to use them with something. And I would like to have an AirHacks principle with additional information, whether it is an alumni or not. So did the user attended already AirHacks or not? Now, there are two examples. And by the way, if you would like to understand the examples, you can also listen to the Java authentication episode. But there is authentication identity store, implements identity store. You could also call it realm, but in the SL375 we had voting, should be identity store or should be realm. And what happened here, I just tried to write as simple code as possible. So I implemented here a credential validation result, and the credential validation result, one of the constructor parameters can be a principal with the name, or name is mandatory. And in my particular case, I have the AHEX principal, and the AHEX principal, if Duke is alumni and all others are not alumni, so I even have like computed attribute here. And the thing is, the authentication store, it checks username and password, and then if the password is not null, then we get already the principal back. Okay, and of course the password has to be 1, 2, 3. So it is a high security standard here. So we have this. So 1, 2, 3, and the and password is not null, and the username should be this. Okay. So all users have the same password. Is better for scalability. Okay. Just joking. Not that you try it at home and you say it scaled better, but we were hacked, you know. So now we have an HTTP authentication mechanism, and you can inject the identity store handler, and the identity store handler is like a facade to the authentication identity store. I fetch the user and the password from request, and I check whether they are valid. If they are not valid, I forward to error HTML, and the error HTML is like exciting page authentication error. And otherwise, I'm say return notify container about login. I'm authenticated. And this example you will also find on GitHub if you search for Soteria or SL375 example. Lots of examples like this. So this is just another example. And this is basically all. And the business code is simple. This is my ping resource. I inject the security context. And what I do right now, I can retrieve my AHEX principal, and I get the name, and I ask, are you alumni? And I return both back. So this is my code, and this is, I think, is the answer to your question, how to implement that. So what it means is, so I would like to switch to here. And by the way, we have WAD running, and WAD was started with Payara and Open Liberty. So whatever we do, it is deployed to both. And what I only have to do is to find the proper curl. And this is the one, and this is the other. So if we try this, authentication error, in 1, 2, 3, we get alumni true. And if the user is not Duke, rather than, let's say, Fluke, then Fluke is not alumni, but is authenticated, and the Fluke now is not authenticated. I hope it fully answers your question. What we learned is Java EE is incredible productive and simple to explain. And on top of that, we have 8K, which is a lot actually. Okay, we have 3 classes. So the thin war is 8K. So usually it's 5, 6, but now it's 8. Okay. So it's still, you know, if you have 8 kilobyte microservice, I would say it qualifies as a war. Cool. So done. So let's see whether you have any questions. No questions, no questions. And the Brett Tucker, also alumni from the show. We love Kotlin in the Android world, I believe. So Kotlin is modern language. So there's no like salvation comparing to JDK. I think was 1.6 back then. And yeah, perfect. So no questions, which is very good because go to next example. So now JAX-RS application, and okay. He asked, by the way, your questions are great. So I ask you, please keep the question Javaistic, means short and concise as possible. No external dependencies. So thin questions. And this question is great. So what he did is he would like to validate and provide additional information or how to do this. So another example. So I implemented an example, which is called JAX-RS BeanValidation, and did it a little bit more stuff here. But ping resource first. Save ping with size of min2, string ping, and whatever is shorter than 2, we get the validation error. So let's see. Oh, this was wrong. And just go here, curl. Right, so if I start this, I get 400 bad request, and you see reason processed, size must be between 2 and whatever. And filter was here, so there's 2 custom headers provided by me. And by the way, if I do it again, but with 9080, I get not found. So 9080, interesting. I thought Liberty, the example is deployed on Liberty. It seems not to be deployed, but I actually started with Liberty, then went to Payara and worked on both servers with exactly the same output. But ignore it for a second. So what I did here is the following. So we have that this save. This fails here, or fails on purpose. And what I implemented an exception mapper, constraint violation mapper, and it maps the constraint violation exception. And what I do here is I get the exception, I get all the constraint violations, I construct a stream, and then I map the message to processed message, and I join with comma. So this is what I do here with the reason, and I can even enrich further by, if you take a look at on the output. So where is the start Liberty? Here's my Payara. You see that the container response filter also kicked in, and so processed size must be between here. So let's now switch back to the IDE. Container response filter. So in the container response filter, I just added additional header, put filter arrays as list was here, and the response interceptor was not executed because of the exception. So what it means is we can provide additional information in the constraint violation in the exception mapper, plus we can provide additional information in filters. And in your particular case, what you also should do, you get the exception on insert because your JPA does not validate. What you should do, you should turn on exception on JPA level, then JPA will also validate and not the database. Okay, now, what is the point difference when you make a JAX-RS resource stateless or request scoped? So I do mostly stateless. One of the reasons, friend of the show, EJB versus CDI, Samolisov. So if you go here, before you continue, next. I agreed. Okay. Now it was the last show because I agreed, but now let's see what happened. So now we have the diagram, performance comparison, EJB versus request scoped. And EJB has the fastest performance. It is about, I think, back then was 15, was it, I don't know, around 20% faster than CDI. So because of performance, it is in my particular case, what I did, pink resource, there's nothing on there. But usually what I do is stateless. I do this. And by the way, now we can see whether the what is still working. What, where are you? And what is of course not working because he's or what is on wrong. So now we can start here just for fun. So now 7 kilobyte deployed, JAX-RS BeanValidation. And now on every change in the IDE, so if I change here something, let's say Jakarta, then what should kick in? Yeah, and deployed. So this is what. But now this is what I usually do. So what it means is all the methods are transactional. The performance is better, and we have one instance per thread, which is preferable. Request code will be also one instance per thread, but the request code will reconstruct the instance on every request, and stateless keep the instance's memory, so the dependency injection doesn't happen. So this is the preferred way. Sometimes I think Payara 4 something had a problem that with stateless MicroProfile metrics didn't work, so I was forced to use request scope sometimes, but I prefer stateless. And let's say if Jakarta E9 or 10 or 11 will deprecate EJB, which would be actually not that bad because the less spec we have, the leaner we are, then we would need, a pullable or whatever replacement in CDI, and even better, I would expect to have a stereotype with similar like stateless pooled or whatever, let's say, and we get a stereotype stateless pooled, which would behave like stateless EGB. Okay. I think this we answered and even implemented this. Book about JAX-RS best practices. I think there are not a lot best practices. What you should, the main reason of JAX-RS is the API are not RESTful. So this is in most projects. They are just, or not even, they do not have to be RESTful, but they should be domain or business driven at least. And in some projects, what I still see is like they just use get, or they just use get and post and never put and never delete, for instance. So now done. Next one. Let's see what happens here. Okay, cool. Hi Adam, how do you do a MicroProfile config to externalize a database configuration? I mean, database configuration in MicroProfile config is not necessary because major application servers can support something like substitution of variables. And if you search for instance, Payara variable substitution config, and all the servers are doing this, so it just comes out of the box. And how it works is you just put placeholders in the configuration of the application server, and in Docker or in on OpenShift it gets automatically replaced by DC or BC, deployment config or build config. Okay, cool. Yeah. In what kind of project shall you use microservice architecture? I don't like the term microservice architecture. For me, it didn't change that much. I just misuse microservice architecture to my clients, to introduce another war, and or to get rid of shared deployment. So, but from business perspective, I think the best case is where you can split a table, for instance, with historization into two microservices and copying the data, for instance, performance reasons. So, or if you have several teams which care about different aspects of the business, then, microservices are the way to go, because you can have two deployables which are independent from each other, and they can be deployed on, with different versions, and it just works without a lot of, administrative overhead. So it should just occur. So first, if you should first, deeply think about domain and business logic, about team structure. And if you don't see microservices, then get rid of them and just go with a monolith or microlith, thin war with everything inside. I mean, this would be the best, because everything is deployed at once, and yeah, it's done. How to choose between app servers for a project? So I use actually all of them. And Glassfish, Payara, I wouldn't use Glassfish right now, for instance, because Payara is patch Glassfish, and you can even buy commercial support. So I wouldn't use Glassfish in commercial projects. There is no reason for that. And if Payara goes out of business, which is not very likely because they are hiring a lot, which actually is likely, if they will hire thousands of developers, then something could happen. But right now they look great. And and even if they would be out of business, you can still migrate back to Glassfish. And yeah. So Payara is like Glassfish without the bugs. So Glassfish minus $500 or $1,000 or something like this. Whitefly is the most popular one, and this usually occurs. I'll give you some examples. And you didn't have OpenLiberty because, OpenLiberty is also a very interesting server. For instance, give you an example. In one client at AS400, this is like a host system, and they were only allowed to use Tomcat because for historical reasons, they was already certified or whatever. And in this particular case, we use Tommy, because Tomcat and Tommy is the same. So we just deployed a war to our Tomcat and we got Tommy. Whitefly, a no-brainer. If the client is a Red Hat shop, then Whitefly is a natural extension because usually they buy support for Red Hat, and then I would propose Whitefly. Payara, if the client used in the past Glassfish, and Glassfish was crazy popular because as I remember, Whitefly had, or JBoss back then had around, I think JBoss 5. They had a bad time, JBoss 5, 6 or something. There was one release was not really usable, and back then lots of projects moved from Whitefly to Payara. Yeah, and OpenLiberty is, from the technological perspective, one of the best right now because it's the newest. There was like the WebSphere. So if there is a WebSphere shop, I always propose OpenLiberty because it is also called WebSphere Liberty. For management, it's a completely different server. But if you say, okay, WebSphere and WebSphere Liberty is a nice hack to get, lightweight server. And the WebSphere is or OpenLiberty is extremely modular. Extremely small, and one of these smallest problems. Sometimes they try to be, too perfect, I would say. For instance, per accident, I found out that if you do, for instance, they have an own certificate store which is decoupled from JDK, which is great, but this is unusual for application servers. So I tried to communicate via SSL with Google, and it wasn't possible because the certificate was lacking. So it was 5 minutes to look it up and say, okay, now I use the JDK certificate store, and it worked. But in such cases, OpenLiberty could be too looking forward because the other servers are behave a little bit different. But I like OpenLiberty a lot, and I will even port some stuff to OpenLiberty on my server. So unfortunately, what I have to tell you, there are no bad servers out there. So whatever you mentioned plus OpenLiberty is great. I wouldn't use Glassfish because Payara is better. That's the only thing. Okay, how to start learning microservices with Java EE, then learn Docker. I don't think you need a lot to learn Docker. So I think if you already listen to the show and you probably understand a little bit, then Docker is just like virtualization, faster version of virtualization. Think about that. And difference between Docker and OpenShift. This is very simple distinction. Docker is like a JVM, and OpenShift would be like the management of different JVMs. OpenShift will start and stop JVMs and stuff like that. So therefore, OpenShift manages Docker containers with Kubernetes configuration and so forth for you. So OpenShift, I would say OpenShift is your private cloud, and the Docker is one process of such cloud. So this is the distinction. How to start learning microservices with Java EE. I have an online course about that. It is either I think $10 or $40 or something like this. And there's a completely free Red Hat course. So just watch the videos. They're completely free. 50 videos. I think you will learn a lot with OpenShift, Docker. And I even implemented some Java EE microservice patterns, I think. Where I can host Java EE everywhere, because Java EE is really cloud native technology. Why? What you would do, for instance, you can pick one container from Docklands or from whatever you like, and you would push the application server to the private registry from Amazon, from Oracle containers, Google Cloud, it doesn't matter. And now comes the cool part. Because our wars are thin, you will push 50 times a day just 5K or 8K or 500K. Tobias is a friend of the show, and Tobias is we also recorded an episode together because he's an architect at IBM and wrote a really interesting application for elderly people who are completely with Open Liberty and Java 8 stack. So if you need IBM consultants, try to find him. So he's so I think he's a little bit afraid of ESBs, so which is a very good sign. But he asked me something interesting because ever try to apply the BC pattern for larger HTML5 applications? And the answer is always. So all my SPAs and PWAs always have boundary control entities, and it works great. Boundary are my custom elements and web components. Controls are I wanted to say Java classes are JavaScript files with functions, so there are no more classes, and model where the state happens, and sometimes model just uses session storage or local storage just to keep the state. So and it works extremely well. And how it works is the components can talk to services. If the services talk, for instance, to the backend, everything is asynchronous, and the response comes back, I create a custom event which is dispatched, and the custom elements listen to this event, and then update happens. So it works great. I thought, I actually wanted to use it in my online course, but the application was still too simple. So I think I should extend it with a backend component, and then I could record a screencast about BC or something. It works the best with complex business logic. In one client, I tried to draw on a table BCE, and it didn't work. So okay, now tell me what you would like to build, and we built one component with BCE, and this was the best experience. Okay. So let's see what happens here in Twitter. I cannot ignore, the Twitter audience. So Kotlin and nothing, which is very good. Now, how can you handle DB relationships in microservice if you have database per service calls, and it only works, as I said before, when if you are thinking about the business first. Let's say, my standard example, we have hotel booking and we have flight. So what you could do in a monolithic application, you have like booking, which points to flight and hotel booking, and this would work in a monolith, but not in microservices. And in microservice would like I have like a booking application which knows hotel reservation and flight reservation, and there will be coarser-grained REST invocations. Okay, is JPA good to use in microservices? JPA is great, especially in microservices, and JPA usually in microservice area doesn't have lots of performance problems or problems. Why not? Because the data model is simpler, and microservices also tend to denormalize the data, which is also good for JPA. So I think JPA is great technology, and I see it all the time and use it all the time. So Dempiler says, hey Adam, I work in a small company that work with Java. He wants to buy your online workshops for developers. And what he means is this AirHacks.io. And this looks like my own server, but it isn't. So this is a service from Vimeo. This is like YouTube. And he asked me, but we have problems with credit card. I want to if accept bank transfer. So what I do with Vimeo, I have a business account or pro account or something, and I have to pay them per year. And I think it works over PayPal, not credit card. I'm not sure, but they have different payment possibilities, and you have to ask Vimeo support because I have no idea. And actually I never bought my own videos. I think it's not even possible from the business process perspective. Cool. Now, Michaui Husam. Cool. He works Java since Java 6, React.js, and AngularJS. That's interesting, Michai. If you know both React, as actually, if you know React.js and AngularJS equally well, it's actually impossible to do both, because React is very pragmatic, and especially you know Java 6 and React, and you're still doing Angular. I mean, this is like Angular. You know, Angular is, I would say, like J2E 1.4 with Xdoclet plus OSGI. This is what I would say Angular, and React and Java EE is just great. So, but your question is different. We have an old Spring project using JSF and Dozer mapper. This project is destined to large public of users, so we have performance issue even in with an architecture of clusters. Okay, the question is now where you have the performance issues. Usually with JSF you could get the issues CPU, because JSF does a lots of calculations on the server. So, and they would like to use Angular, and they have no good experience with Angular. Okay, now I got you. So if you so if you would like to start with Angular, just try to set up the project and create a single component with a button. Then go to the node modules and count just the number of downloaded folders and not even the files, and see what happens behind the scenes, and then come back to the next AirHacks.tv. I would really appreciate your feedback. But let's say you manage this and still like the result. So and there's is there a good performance benefit of using SPA framework like Angular over JSF? And forget Angular, like SPA, any framework, or no frameworks like web standards, what I'm doing, and JSF. And the answer is you cannot compare them, because SPA is client-centric, JSF is server-centric. It means what you get out of JSF is the data binding. If you have formula or form, and you add data to the form, the data gets automatically replicated and validated on the server. In SPA, you will have to do it by yourself. So if your application comprises just forms, then what could even happen? That JSF is faster than SPA. But if the application just render things which can be cached, then SPA could have infinitely better performance. Why? Because actually the example I told you before with how was called GitHub.com Adam Bean, and this was let's see, repositories, enterprise training. Effective web training. So the app I created for the online course, Effective Web.training, this app, it doesn't have a server component. So it is like a fat client in a browser. So what it means is the performance is infinite good, because you don't even need the server. So having an SPA, you can just talk once a month with the server, so the server will wake up. This would be actually a great function as a service. Like if we just store things, we just wake up once a month and then never again. But I assume it's not the case in your case. So the more you have to communicate with the server, the less interesting SPA becomes. Okay. And what you can also do with JSF, where are you? So we close this. So performance, you can also, there are trade-off in JSF. Just search for settings. If you're using, for instance, Mohara, you can also have compression of the state on the client, on the server. You can turn off the compression, then more data is transferred, but there is less impact on CPU. So you can tweak a lot a JSF application. So in which case we use Dozer, because from my point of view, it's not necessary to use it, especially with JSF. Absolutely. So Dozer is not necessary. And actually what I did is Adam Bean Dozer. So what I wrote, when was it? 6 years ago. It's crazy. In case Dozer or Bean utils are working well, you have a problem. And I mean, what Dozer or Bean utils are misused to copy, identical objects back and forth, and this is the problem. Okay. incredible 50 minutes with live presentation of 2 new apps. And let's see what happens in the chat. Nothing. In the Twitter, nothing. Then I would say, see you on my workshops. And what I will do, if you interested in the examples, I could blog about them. And what also happened, I recorded a session for Istanbul Java user group. It should be on my YouTube channel, and it is like the title was Web like Java EE, so more or less. And this screencast is already very popular. So if you like, watch this. I would probably publish it also in to just watch my blog, or Jakarta EE blogs is like the aggregator. So thank you for watching, and see you next month.